Alright guys, so this Sunday we have UFC Fight Night 126. It's going to be headlined by a welterweight bout between Yancy Medeiros and Donald Cowboy Cerrone and in Austin, Texas actually. And I'm pretty bummed out because it's about an hour away from where I live. I was really looking forward to trying to get tickets to try to go. I've never been to a UFC event, and they rarely come to Texas, so I was really looking forward to it. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get the tickets, so I'm not going to be there, but I will be watching. This is definitely a really good card, especially for it being a Fox card. So I am definitely looking forward to some of the fights. I think there are some very entertaining matchups on this card. So without further ado, let's get into my predictions. Now for the first fight, we have a lightweight bout between Thibault Guty and Super Sage Northcutt. Now Thibault Guty, right, is coming off of a win against Andrew Holbrook, in which he knocked him out in the first round. Prior to that fight, he was on a 3-fight losing streak. He had gotten submitted twice and knocked out once. And in that fight against Andrew Holbrook, it was a really good fight. Both guys were exchanging on the feet. Guty does really have a good boxing. He has power in his hands. Was really putting on the pressure and being aggressive in that fight against Andrew Holbrook. Now, in terms of his defense and his head movement, he doesn't move that well. His defense is not that good. In fact, I believe he actually absorbs more punches than he lands per round. Holbrook was having some success on the feet against him. Now, the only issue was that at some point in the later half of the first round, Holbrook just started backpedaling, and he kind of was just, on the defensive side, wasn't really being as aggressive as he was at the beginning of the fight, and that allowed for Guty to really tee off on him, to really be aggressive, to attack the body and land combination after combination before eventually, being able to finish the fight. He got the knockout victory in that fight. But his defense, as I keep reiterating, he did get tagged up in that fight, and if he's going up against a guy like Sage Northcutt, who is as crisp and as clean with his striking. He's a black belt in Taekwondo. He's really fast. His kicks are sharp. His boxing is solid. And on top of all that, he's pretty patient for the most part. And he's a really good counter striker. And I think the ability that he has to be able to finish a fight, in a variety of different ways because he's so fast, right? He's very athletic. He's young. He came into the UFC, I believe he was about 19, 20 years old. He was just going into college. But he does have experience in the UFC. He has a couple fights. He split, his last 4 fights. He's won 2, he's lost 2. He was submitted by Brian Barberina. And then there was a loss that he suffered against Mickey Gall, in which Mickey Gall was just pressuring him, trying to make it a scrappy fight. He caught him. Even though Sage Northcutt was outlanding Mickey Gall, through in the beginning of that fight, but Gall landed a clean shot on him, hurt him, and then eventually submitted him. And I think in this fight, if Guty wants to have any success, it's going to be, through wrestling and through the ground. But we all know that Guty likes to stand up. He likes to exchange punches. He really likes to make it a war, and I think in this fight against Sage Northcutt, that's not going to cut it because Northcutt is too sharp. His counter-punching abilities, he's fast. And I think the way that Guty just kind of presses forward and doesn't really defend himself very well, I just think it's going to make for target practice for Sage Northcutt. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Guty can land a shot that can hurt Sage the way Mickey Gall did. But I don't think that the chances are as high of that happening. I think Northcutt is going to pick him apart, at range, with kicks, establish the jab as well, and just kind of keep distance and pick him apart from the outside. So I'm going to pick Sage Northcutt to win this fight via unanimous decision. Now, next up, we have a featherweight bout between Steven Peterson and Brandon Davis. Now, both these guys made their first appearance on Dana White's Contender Series, so technically this is going to be the UFC debut for Steven Peterson, not counting the Contender Series fight. Now, Brandon Davis won his Contender Series fight, got a contract, lost his UFC debut against Kyle Bochniak, so this is going to be his second fight on a UFC card. And although these two guys may be relatively unknown, right, to the casual fans, both their fights in the Contender Series were very, very entertaining fights. Now, Steven Peterson fought Benito Lopez, right, who won his UFC debut against Albert Morales. Is a very talented striker, very long, very rangy, very flashy in his techniques. And it was a good fight. It was a very competitive fight. Peterson did have success landing on Benito Lopez, landed a few takedowns. Is very well-rounded, actually. I believe he's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He is a strong wrestler. He has pretty good boxing skills, and he has heart. He's very aggressive as well. Now, Brandon Davis, right, who made his debut right on the Contender Series against Austin Arnett, looked very sharp, especially in the early rounds, was slipping punches nicely, doing a nice job of countering. He's a brown belt in Muay Thai, has some solid kicks, has a nice 1-2, has a really good jab as well. And the thing that makes this fight so interesting in my eyes is that they're young They're hungry. They're looking to make a name for themselves, and sometimes that's all you need, or that is a recipe, right, for a great fight. Two guys that are just gonna go out there and lay it all on the line. Now, I do think that Steven Peterson is a bit more stationary than Brandon Davis is. Davis, showed some really nice head movement in his fight against Austin Arnett. Obviously, that was a 3-round fight. It was very competitive. Both guys were landing and absorbing shots, so it was only a matter of time right before both guys kind of tired out. And in the late second, in the third round, Austin Arnett was able to land some shots on Brandon Davis. His head movement wasn't the same, obviously, as the early rounds, but that was a given, being the way the pace of the fight, and the way these two guys were exchanging shots. Now, in this fight, I just think that Brandon Davis striking is better than Steven Peterson. I think if Peterson wants to have success, it's going to be through his wrestling. It's going to be by pressuring, getting Brandon Davis against the cage, trying to make it a dirty, scrappy fight. Davis is gonna have to keep the fight in the center of the octagon if he wants to have success. I think using the leg kicks, the body kicks, maybe utilizing knees in the clinch, but I do think that his counter punching abilities is going to be a big problem for Peterson, being that Peterson does absorb quite a bit of hits. But Peterson is tough, and he has a chin on him. He did eat a couple of clean shots from Benito Lopez, so I don't doubt, his heart and his toughness. I just think that in a 3-round fight, Brandon Davis has a better chance to have success, especially if Peterson does decide to keep the fight standing and does decide to be the aggressor and pressure him. I just think that Brandon Davis' counterpunching abilities is going to be the difference in this fight. So I'm going to pick Brandon Davis to win this fight via unanimous decision. Now, for the third fight on this main card, we have a welterweight bout between Thiago Alves and Curtis Millender. Curtis Millender is actually going to be making his UFC debut. He's a very tall, lanky, very rangy fighter, has long legs, is really creative with his striking from the tape that I've seen. I haven't seen much of it, obviously, because this is going to be his UFC debut. But he's very long, he's very rangy, likes to use the kicks, likes to use the jab. He's got power in his hands and in his kicks, so he definitely knows how to finish fights. He's currently on a 6-fight win streak, and he has a very, very good professional record of 14 wins and 3 losses. 17 professional fights means that he has experience in this game. Now, in terms of his defense, there was a couple of moments in some of the fights that I saw on YouTube where he and his opponent would actually get into an exchange, right? An exchange of punches, and rather than keeping his hands, nice and tight, next to his chin, to display solid defense, he kind of just leans back and kind of just throws overhooks or overhands and hooks kind of wildly, and just leaning your head back like that in an exchange, really leaves your chin vulnerable to being countered and eventually getting hurt if someone's able to land a clean shot on you. So that's one of the things that I saw that I don't like. He does have the tendency to fight with his hands low, but he makes up for it with his ability to keep his opponent at distance, with his kicks. And because he's so dangerous, with his legs as well as with his hands. So there is no doubting this guy's talent, right, and his potential. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how he fares against a guy like Thiago Alves, who's very, very experienced. He's been in this game a long time, and he's been able to step inside the octagon with some of the best welterweights in the world. He's fought Matt Hughes, GSP, Carlos Condit, the list goes on and on. This guy's been in the game for a while, and in his prime, he was a very explosive fighter. He's one of the more explosive, athletic fighters, not just in the division, but in the UFC. He's very good boxing. He has power in his hands. Very good Muay Thai, strong leg kicks. He's a solid grappler. He's solid on the ground. He's just a very well-rounded fighter. And on top of that, like I said earlier, he has experience. He's been in the octagon with some of the best welterweights in the world. Matt Hughes, Carlos Condit, George St. Pierre, the list goes on and on. Now, at this point in his career, he is obviously not the same fighter that he once was. He's lost 2 of his last 3 fights. He lost to Carlos Condit, and he lost to Jim Miller. And his last fight, he actually won. He was able to come away with a decision victory over Patrick Cote. His boxing was really good, and he looked really sharp in that fight. Dropped Cote twice, actually. Now, Cote obviously is not a world beater, right? He's not, a top contender or anything like that. But it was a solid win. It was a solid way for Thiago Alves to get back into the win column, to carry some momentum, with him in his next fight. Now, the only issue that I have with Thiago Alves right now, besides his age, right, would be the fact that he's only had 2 fights in the last 2 years or so. He hasn't fought consistently, right? He hasn't stayed in the octagon consistently. So it's going to be interesting to see how he fares against a young, hungry opponent like Curtis Millender. Now, I just think that Millender's range and his length is going to be an issue in this fight, although I'm not a big fan of his awkward style, and his lack of defense, because I have seen him get tagged a few times. I just think that him being as tall as he is, with the reach advantage, with his strong kicks and the power that he has in his hand, I just can't see a way that the smaller, older Thiago Alves is going to be able to win this fight. I think that Millender is going to outland him from the outside, keep the distance in between both of them. And if Alves does want to win this fight, and if he wants to have some success, he's going to have to wrestle. Now, in some of the tape that I saw from Curtis Millender, he was vulnerable to the takedown because he is a taller guy. He doesn't necessarily have the same stability as some of these shorter, stockier, more grounded fighters. So Alves is going to have to work for the takedown. He's going to have to grind, to be able to get inside, attack the body of Millender, work to get the takedown, ground and pound him on the ground. But I think that Millender will do a good job of keeping Alves at bay. And I think he will land something that Alves won't necessarily see coming, because he is that awkward striker, because he throws punches and kicks, from very awkward angles. So I'm going to pick Millender to land something, perhaps a kick in the second round that's going to hurt Alves. He's going to put him away. So I'm going to pick Millender to win his UFC debut via TKO in the second round. Now, next up, we have a lightweight bout between two of the top 15 ranked lightweights in the world, in Francisco Trinaldo and James Vick, who I believe is actually from Texas. So he's gonna be fighting in his home state. I know he was campaigning to fight on this Austin card for quite some time, looking for an opponent. Francisco Trinaldo stepped up, and now this fight is happening. It is a solid fight on paper. I'm really excited to see James Vick right back in the octagon. I think he's a very exciting fighter, and he is definitely on a hot streak, and he's on the come up. He's one of the top young fighters, that's still looking to make a name for himself in terms of being a contender in the division. Trinaldo is a tough guy, so it is going to be one of the tougher opponents that James Vick has faced. So it's definitely going to be interesting. But James Vick, is a freak of nature, and I'm saying that because he's 6'3" and he's fighting in the 155-pound division. He's very long, very rangy. And the fact that he's able to make the weight for his size and his frame, because he's not thin as a rail, he's not a very, very skinny guy. He's very solid. He's a strong dude, carries some weight on him. And the fact that he's able to make that weight, says a lot about the way what he puts into his body, And it says a lot about his nutritionists. I've done a great job of allowing him to be able to cut the weight, in a good manner. I've never really seen him struggle to make that weight. So it's crazy the way this guy is able to fight in the lightweight division. It does definitely give him some huge advantages in almost all the fights that he's in, and it is definitely going to give him the advantage in this fight. Now, James Vick is very tough, He's always in really good shape, really good cardio. Really good boxing skills. He's actually on a 3-fight win streak. He's 7-1 in the UFC, 12-1 in terms of his entire professional record. The last time he lost was to Beneil Dariush. He was knocked out in that fight in the first round. He got caught early, but since then, he's been on a streak, and he's looking to continue that in this fight. He's a good boxer, He's long, he's rangy, has a good jab. He also has good kicks. He's very creative as well with his strikes. And for his size, in that division, he does move very well, better than I anticipated when I first started to watch him fight. So he does move very well. And one of the things I do notice with these taller fighters, I said the same thing about Curtis Millender. When they engage in exchanges, in striking exchanges, they have the tendency to just lean their head back. James Vick does the same thing in his last fight against Joe Duffy. Duffy was able to counter him in the exchanges because Duffy is a really good boxer. I believe he was actually a pro boxer, so he has that boxing experience. Was really landing some clean counter punches on the chin of James Vick, landing some clean leg kicks as well, which was very smart on the part of Joe Duffy, because James Vick is a taller guy, has a lot more ground to cover, in terms of being able to defend his entire body. So Joe Duffy was having success on the feet, and in the second round, I believe towards the end, the last 10 seconds, James Vick actually caught him with an uppercut, that hurt Duffy, dropped him. James Vick jumped on top of him, was landing some ground and pound, and at the last second, right before the bell rang to go into the third round, the referee actually stopped, and I do think it was a premature stoppage. I do think Joe Duffy, he wasn't out cold, He was still conscious. He was still aware. He got up and immediately, was getting upset with the referee, arguing that he could have continued, and I do think he could have, and I think he should have, been given the opportunity to continue to fight, especially because there was only, like 2 or 3 seconds left in the round before the fight was stopped. But James Vick was looking very comfortable in that second round. He started off slow, had a little bit of trouble figuring out Joe Duffy and the quickness, right, and the counter-punching abilities, but did a good job, of eventually, getting comfortable, getting into his zone. Started landing some clean kicks on Duffy, landing some counter-punches of his own, started to establish the jab, and that's what he is, right? He's a very good boxer as well. He's very tough, and Trinaldo as well, has a really good jab. Doesn't move that well in his last fight against Jim Miller. Miller was able to land a couple takedowns in the first round, and in the second and third round, Trinaldo actually did a really, really good job of stuffing the takedowns, kept the fight on the feet, and was just picking Jim Miller apart. There was some moments in the fight where Miller did land some shots on Trinaldo, but Trinaldo, for the most part, did a good job of countering, showed a really good straight left, a really good counter straight left, was throwing some overhands, some hooks, throwing some uppercuts, and was really doing a good job of attacking the body of Jim Miller, not just with kicks, but with punches as well. And I think that that's one thing that Trinaldo is going to have to do in this fight, is attack the body of James Vick, because like I said earlier, usually these taller fighters, are vulnerable to being hit to the body, with kicks, with punches. And I think Trinaldo's going to have to get on the inside and kind of just wear James Vick down, try to break him, because James Vick comes into every fight in excellent condition. He's always in really good shape, doesn't really gas out, but it's going to be difficult. It's easier said than done, to say that all Trinaldo needs to do is attack the legs and work the body early on in the fight, and consistently put pressure. It's easier said than done, because James Vick is very long, and not only that, but he's very good at using his length to his advantage. Like I said, a really good jab, very good boxing skills, and a very tough opponent. Now, in this fight, I do think James Vick is going to get the victory. I do think that he is better on the feet. I think it's going to be difficult for Trinaldo to close the distance, right, and get on the inside and pressure consistently, especially with James Vick constantly landing the jab, constantly landing 1-2 combinations. Now, I do know that Trinaldo can mix it up. I do know that he has power in his hands. I do know that he's a black belt in kickboxing, but I just think that with the momentum that James Vick has, and the weapons that he has to utilize in this fight, we've seen Trinaldo hurt. He was outboxing Kevin Lee, was landing the jab all day on Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee threw a kick that landed cleanly on the chin of Trinaldo, dropped him, and then Kevin Lee eventually submitted him. So, he's been hurt before. And I think James Vick is going to land a couple shots in the second round that are going to hurt Trinaldo. I just think that the length, right, the power, and the techniques of James Vick is going to be a bit too much for Trinaldo. I'm going to pick James Vick to win this fight via TKO in the second round. Now, next up, we have a heavyweight bout between two of the UFC's top 15 heavyweights in the world. We have Marcin Tybura and Derrick the Black Beast Lewis. Now, Derrick Lewis is a very exciting fighter, and you know what he's bringing to the table. Every time he steps into the octagon, he's a headhunter. He has power. He has knockout power. Likes to pressure, likes to press forward, and just continuously attempts to knock your head off from the moment the bell rings, right, to the moment the fight ends. He's in there. He's chasing you down, and he's looking to knock you out. That's all he knows how to do, and he's very good at it. He has a very good professional record. He actually wins 86% of his fights via knockout or TKO. He's going to look to do the same thing, in this fight against Marcin Tybura. Now, in his last fight, right, I believe he was on a 3 or 4 fight win streak, before he stepped inside the octagon with Mark Hunt. It was a scrappy fight, right? Both guys are heavy hitters, right? Are knockout artists. And many people, included myself, believe that one of them was going to land that shot that was going to knock the other person out in the first round. I believe that fight was going to end early. It was much longer than I anticipated it to be. It actually went into the 4th round. Derrick Lewis was gassed out, before Mark Hunt landed a shot that put him away. Won that fight via TKO. And that's one of the things that Derrick Lewis, one of the knocks I have on Derrick Lewis is the fact that he gasses out. Now, he was scheduled to fight Fabricio Verdum. That fight was called off. Obviously, he said he had back issues, I think like 2 or 3 hours before the fight was going to take place. So he's going to step inside the octagon, against Marcin Tybura, who is a very polished striker. Very well-rounded as well. I like the kicks that he throws to the body. Very mobile for a guy of his size. Very good boxing. He's in good shape as well. In his last fight against Fabricio Verdum, he did lose. Fabricio Verdum really picked him apart on the feet. The experience, right, and the difference in the level the type of fighter that they are really came to light. We saw that Fabricio Verdum is still, very much in a title contender. I don't necessarily think he can beat Stipe Miocic, but he's still one of the best fighters in this division, and he proved it against Marcin Tybura, who is rather inexperienced in those types of fights against those types of names. So he was picked apart on the feet. He was out-grappled by Fabricio Verdum. Now, in this fight, he's not going to have to worry about being out-grappled in Derrick Lewis. We still have to see if Derrick Lewis is going to come into this fight in the shape that we are expecting him, because we've seen the videos that he's posting. He looked very good in the weigh-in earlier today. So we're going to see the type of Derrick Lewis that we get. But one thing that doesn't change about Derrick Lewis is the fact that he is going to stand in front of you and he's going to try to knock your head off. He's going to try to knock you out and get you out of there early. I think that if Marcin Tybura does a good job of being mobile, of allowing Derrick Lewis to chase him, and making him pay with counter punches, establishing the distance with the jab, attacking the legs and the body of Derrick Lewis, because Travis Browne did a very good job of tiring Derrick Lewis out, of attacking the body, was landing some clean shots, actually hurt Derrick Lewis with a couple of the kicks that he was throwing to the gut, of Lewis, but Lewis eventually landed a shot that hurt Browne and put him away, and that was a blueprint as to how to beat a guy like Derrick Lewis. Make him chase you, and make him pay by attacking the body, right, attacking the legs, and slowing him down, making him gas out faster than he usually does. And because Tybura is the more polished striker, because he does have a very good jab, because he has some very strong kicks, I think that he should be the favorite in this fight, and I think I'm going to pick him to actually outwork Derrick Lewis. I think he's going to outwork him. I think he's going to outland him while doing a good job of being mobile, right, of making sure that he's not stationary, because if there's one thing that you do not want to do is be a stationary target in front of a guy like Derrick Lewis, in front of a guy that hits as hard as he does. But I trust that he will do that. Not only that, but Tybura is a very good wrestler, a very strong grappler. I do think he can get this fight to the ground, and he also has some very dangerous ground and pound. So I think that Tybura is the safe pick here. I do expect them to kind of feel Derrick Lewis out to see what Lewis's approach is going to be to this fight. If he's going to come out swinging wildly, if he's going to be a bit more patient, because remember, Derrick Lewis has promised that he is going to show us something different, that he is a new and improved version of himself. So I think Tybura is going to be a bit patient at the beginning, work the legs, work the body, and eventually try to get the fight to the ground. So I'm going to pick Marcin Tybura to actually win this fight via unanimous decision. Next up, we have the main event of the evening, a welterweight matchup between Donald Cowboy Cerrone and Yancy Medeiros. Both these guys are former 155-pounders, made the move up to the welterweight division, and both have had success in their new weight class. So it's going to be interesting to see how this fight plays out. It's also going to be interesting because both these guys are strikers. Both of these guys like to stand and bang, and it's going to make for a very, very entertaining fight. Now, Yancy Medeiros, right, like I said, is a former lightweight. He made the move up to welterweight, and he's currently on a 3-fight win streak. He beat the likes of Eric Silva, Sean Spencer, and Alex Oliveira. Now, Yancy is a very good striker, very good boxer. Has very good kicks as well. He's solid on the ground, has 4 professional wins by submission, has won over half of his fights by knockout. So he has power. He has power in his hands. Now, his last fight against Alex Oliveira was a very good fight, one of the better fights that I have ever seen. In the first round, he actually dropped Oliveira first. Oliveira recovered and then went on to rock him bad like 2 or 3 times in the same round. But that just goes to show the power that Oliveira has in his hands. Yancy wasn't really doing a good job of moving early on in the fight. He was just consistently staying in that pocket, and allowing for Oliveira to counter him, to attack the legs and the body as well. Now, going into the third round, right, it was a very close fight. I believe I had it 1-1. In the third fight, Oliveira wobbled Yancy Medeiros a couple more times, had him hurt badly. And then towards the end of the last round, right, the third round, I'm not sure if it was something that Yancy landed, if it was a jab or a straight, if it was just an injury that he suffered earlier in the fight, but Oliveira actually started to kind of blink his eye. I know he had broken his nose in the first round, but he was kind of like blinking his eye and kind of reaching for it, and then just curled up on his own. And just kind of shelled up. Had his back against the cage, had his hands up. And Yancy Medeiros just teed off on him. Was landing a couple combinations, a couple power shots, landed a knee. Before Oliveira fell down. So I'm sure it was the injury that was affecting him. Now, throughout that third round, I do think that Cowboy Oliveira was winning that fight. I do think that if that injury would not have happened, I do think he would have came away with either a unanimous decision or a split decision, simply because it was a very, very close fight up until that point. Now, as far as Yancy Medeiros, it was a good fight, a good win for him against a tough opponent who was ranked inside the top 15, but it wasn't necessarily the best performance in terms of technique, but you can't blame it. You can't blame him for it, especially going up against a guy as tough as Oliveira. Now, he's going up against a UFC veteran in Cowboy Cerrone, and Medeiros does have experience, but Cerrone's been one of the best for a long time. He was a title contender in the 155-pound division, had been in the octagon with the likes of Anthony Pettis, Eddie Alvarez, Rafael Dos Anjos, Ben Henderson, the list goes on, and then he moves up to welterweight, and he immediately found success. He beat Rick Story, he beat Matt Brown, but he's lost 3 in a row. He got TKO'd by Jorge Masvidal in the second round. He lost to Robbie Lawler, in a close fight. I do think that he won that fight. I don't think they should have given it to Lawler. I do think that he did enough to come away with that victory, but they gave it to Lawler. And he most recently got TKO'd by Darren Till in the first round. Now, obviously, he's aging, right? And he's showing that he's not necessarily the same fighter that he was once. He's still tough, right? Even though he got TKO'd by Darren Till and Jorge Masvidal, it wasn't like he got knocked out cold. It's just that Masvidal has power in his hands, is a very, very good boxer, one of the better boxers in that division. They just did a good job of closing the distance and landing those overhands and those hooks, and wobbled Cerrone a couple times. The same thing with Till. Darren Till was special. He's eventually going to get a crack at the title with a couple more victories, maybe beating an opponent or two inside the top 5. And Darren Till, right, is a great striker. He's young, he's big, he's very powerful. So I understand, how he got steamrolled in that fight. I understand how Cowboy was dominated in those 2 fights. Now, in a former champion against Robbie Lawler, Cerrone did look good. He did have some success in the clinch. His Muay Thai is very good. His boxing is very good. He has some very, very strong leg kicks. His ground game, is excellent. And on top of that, he's a very, very tough guy. And so is Yancy. You know what I mean? And the issue I have with both these fighters is for Cowboy, right? On Cowboy's part is the fact that he's aging, right? He's not the same fighter, like I said earlier. He's not the same fighter that he once was. And the issue I have with Yancy is the fact that when he has faced, right, solid opponents, in more specifically in the 155-pound division, because he just recently only had 3 fights, right? He only has 3 fights in the 170-pound division. But when he faced guys like Francisco Trinaldo, when he faced guys like Dustin Poirier, he wasn't able to get the job done. Now, I understand that's a different weight class. I understand that he may be better, better off in the 170-pound division where he feels stronger, where he feels rejuvenated. I understand that. But the fact that he was not able to get it done against, better opponents than he was used to facing is a red flag for me to pick him in this fight. And on top of that, when he faced a ranked opponent like Oliveira, who's tough, who's a great striker, who has power, he got wobbled time and time again. He was getting clipped up. Now, I'll give it to him that he's very tough, right? He is a very tough dude, and I like Yancy Medeiros. I'm a big fan of his, but I am just not impressed. I'm not impressed with his technique. He didn't impress me in that fight. He was getting clipped up. He was getting tagged over and over. He doesn't move very well, and I think that he is going to be vulnerable to Cowboy's leg kicks because he does lean heavily on that lead leg. I do think he's going to be vulnerable to being attacked to the body, but the same way I do think that Cowboy is going to be vulnerable to getting tagged, because Yancy does have power. Yancy is a good boxer, right? And I'm not ruling him out in this fight, but I just don't think that he can come in here and beat a guy that's as polished and as technically sound as Donald Cerrone. Now, I won't be surprised if Yancy does catch him early in the first round. But in that fight against Oliveira, the way Yancy was fighting, the pace at which he was fighting, he did get gassed out in the second round. Now, he did get a little bit more energy going into the third, but he was gassed out in the second half of that fight. And if you get gassed out against a guy like Donald Cerrone, you're going to be in a world of trouble because Cerrone is always in great shape. And if Yancy does end up getting gassed out, if he tries to press forward, right, and he puts large amounts of pressure in the beginning of the fight and doesn't really land anything that puts Cerrone in danger, then he's going to gas out, right? He's going to overexert himself, and then Cerrone's going to start to attack the body. He's going to start to attack the leg. He's going to engage in the clinch. He's going to land knees to the body, do everything in his power to just break Yancy Medeiros. Now, you can say, oh, well, Cowboy's been knocked out or he's been finished in 2 of his last 3 fights. He's not the same. He's old. He's been in this game a long time. He's already wearing down. He's an aging fighter. But you cannot disagree with the fact that both Darren Till and Jorge Masvidal, in my opinion at least, and I'm sure many other people who watch the sport would agree, would clip Yancy Medeiros up the same way they did to Donald Cerrone, because Yancy Medeiros has power. He's a good boxer, but he doesn't move. He doesn't move as well as some of these other fighters. So I just think that the experience of Donald Cerrone is going to pay off in this fight. I think he's due, to get a victory. I don't think he's completely washed up. I still think he has a little bit left in the tank in terms of being able to get some victories, right, and in terms of being able to still compete, with some of the top guys in this division. Obviously not championship material, but I think that Cerrone is going to come away with the victory in this fight. I just think he's going to outwork Yancy Medeiros. I think the experience is going to be, shown in this fight, right? The difference in experience, in terms of being in these, main card fights, in these 5-round fights. So I'm going to pick Cerrone to outwork Yancy Medeiros and earn this unanimous decision victory. I will not be surprised if Yancy Medeiros clips him. I will say it again, and is able to finish the fight early on. But I just don't feel comfortable picking Medeiros to win this type of fight yet, at least. So I'm going to pick Cerrone to win this fight via unanimous decision. Now, if you like these predictions, make sure to hit the like button. Make sure to comment down below who you think is going to win the main event and also the rest of the fights on this card. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and stay tuned for more content.